Thank you all. I will try to get through this quickly because I know between you and food is not necessarily a good place to be. So I am Dawn. This is HB. There is a story behind the bear. If you're interested, come find me afterwards and I'll tell you his story, or her story, I guess. I don't know. So who am I? I am a lover of stories. I've been writing stories since I was very, very little. Here's a couple of examples of some of my earliest writing samples. I had a fascination with unicorns and time travel. I tried to predict the future in one of these stories, and I was wildly inaccurate about what today would look like. So hopefully I've gotten a little bit better in some of my storytelling capabilities. I read quite a bit. According to Goodreads, I've read 17 books so far this year, and there's only 126 books that are on my books to read list. I read everything from fiction to how to tell better stories. And for work, I also tell stories. I am the director of product marketing for Catchpoint, and so that means I write about monitoring and observability and DevOps and talk about it. So all of that is stories. And what on earth does any of this have to do with monitoring? Last year, I was sitting out in the audience, and I had this epiphany. Like, light bulbs started going off. I've been working in the monitoring field for many, many years, and I've tried to get out of it and do something different, and it pulls me back in. And I realized when I was sitting out in the audience, somebody said that monitoring is about stories. I'm like, well, that's why I like it so much. I love telling stories. I love hearing stories. And monitoring is about stories. It's about what is our data telling us, what can we learn, and how can we share that information with others in a way that makes sense. Stories are everywhere. They're on Facebook. They're on Twitter. They're on Medium. We read blogs about what's going on. We attend events like Monitorama, and we hear talks, and those have stories included in them. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn and get more information. And storytelling is this universal human trait. It is across all cultures, and stories have existed for thousands and thousands of years. And the reason they've existed for so long is because they are so powerful. There's a tribe in the Philippines called the Ada. And this group of people value storytelling above any other characteristics. Storytellers are more revered than doctors in this community. There's a group of researchers from University College in London, and they were researching these people, and they were asking a bunch of questions on what traits and characteristics matter, and who do you want to live with? And they threw in a bunch of traits and characteristics, and do you want to live with people that can cure your ails or whatever? And at a last minute, they decided, let's throw in information about storytelling. And what they found out was that the people in the community that were labeled the best storytellers were also the people that were listed as the person they most wanted to live with and spend time with. And the more they dug into this, they realized that stories are such an integral part of the Ada's community, that they use stories to talk about the qualities that matter for this community to be successful. They are about cooperation and egalitarianism and gender equality. And these are the traits that teach the norms that are important to them. And so, of course, the storytellers are the ones that are most wanted to be lived with because they hold the traits that people look up to. At work, we are surrounded by stories. We write user stories to talk about features that need to be built in our products. We hold post-incident retrospectives that tell stories about what happened during an incident. We interview. We collect data. There are stories embedded in all of this, and the goal is to learn from the stories we're telling and from we're hearing and make our stories stronger. And one of the reasons that storytelling is so important is it helps us remember. If you want somebody to learn something, to remember something, tell them a story. Sorry, this is making weird noises. Logan did an excellent example this morning of describing how to use stories to help you remember information and the importance of stories to learn and to grow. And one of the reasons that stories are so important is we are bombarded with information. And in order to process this information, we've developed these cognitive biases. And stories help us combat these biases. When we look at biases, there's 4 main categories that they can fall into. One is there's too much information. Who thinks that they have too much information that they're bombarded with on a pretty regular basis? In order to remember the important pieces, you tell yourself stories. What we remember are the stories. Those kind of float to the top of what we're able to remember. The second challenge is there's not enough meaning behind the information that we're receiving. If you tell a story, it adds meaning to what you're telling. Instead of just throwing a bunch of numbers at people, tell a story. Add some meaning, add some context to that information. We don't have enough time. I wish I had more time. But in order to remember information, the stories help us in that way. And finally, there's not enough memory. Just like our computer systems have finite memories, so do our brains. We'll forget facts and figures unless there is a compelling story that's attached to those facts and figures. So in order to help us process 11 million pieces of information that we're being bombarded with, we wrap them around stories. Stories inspire and motivate us. It's not just about the technology that's being used. Facts and ideas aren't going to sell themselves unless we add stories behind it. If you're trying to compel people to change, to do something a little bit different, you want to approach that with a story. Stories have common elements to them, any story. Doesn't matter how long, how short, what the story is about. There's common elements. There's a setting. It takes place in a certain location. There are people that are involved in this. There's themes involved. There's conflict, and there's plot twists. Think about an incident that you recently had at work. You were dealing with other people. Those were the characters. You were sharing that information with other stakeholders within the organization, some supporting characters there. There's a conflict. Okay, there's an incident. The conflict's pretty identified that something's broken, we need to fix it. Where was it taking place? What were the systems that were impacted by this? Is there a pattern that we've seen in a theme? Have we seen stuff like this before? And what was the plot twist? Who's ever tried to diagnose a problem thinking, I know exactly what it is, and you go down this path, and then you realize it wasn't here. The problem was over here. Those are the plot twists and turns that exist. When presenting data, when looking at incidents, consider all of these elements when you're presenting the information in a post-incident review. From a character perspective, we identify with characters that we feel empathy about, that we care about. In order to present more solid and stronger stories around your data, be a little empathetic. Think about what are the people that I'm presenting this data to interested in? What is it that they care about? They don't just care about the numbers. How does this number on how long it took us to resolve an incident impact the business? How does it impact other people? There are 4 attributes of empathy according to Teresa Wiseman. One is perspective taking. How do other people see this? Don't look at the data just from your perspective, but look at it from the perspective of the broader organization and from other people. Be non-judgmental. Don't point fingers. When there's an incident, avoid the blame game. Things break. We have really complex systems that have been built, and they're going to not always function the way we want them to. It's not somebody's fault. It isn't human error. Avoid the judgment in all of this. Recognize the emotions in the people that you're talking to. When you're sharing this information, are they tuning out? Are they getting aggravated? Are they getting agitated? And communicate your understanding of that person's feelings. When you're talking about an outage, it's like, well, at least it's not as bad as the one we had last week. Words like at least really minimizes people's feelings. And if it's the first time they're involved in an incident, it makes them feel a little less able to learn from what's going on. Stories help us make sense of the events around us and turning negatives into positives. They have to follow a certain pattern. When you're telling a story, don't group like elements together. Put them in a way that logically makes sense. You don't want to necessarily have an appendix with, hey, there's all the plot twists. Weave it into the story. Build the narrative in a stronger way. Make your stories exciting and entertaining. Yeah, if you're talking about an incident, maybe you don't want to make it that entertaining, but try to engage people with emotions. In order to make that connection, you need to speak to them on an emotional level. One method that I try to utilize whenever I'm presenting any type of data or information is the KISS method, and that's keep it simple. Persuasive storytelling doesn't have to be complicated. You don't need to share all of the information and let people know how much you know. The simpler you can explain information, the better. It's really easy to make things complicated. It's a lot harder to make it simple. And when you're presenting data, when you're looking at all the metrics that are being collected, what is the best way of looking at it? What is the easiest way to make other people understand? Don't try to impress people with fancy charts and graphs that take 20 minutes to explain what's going on. And the easier people are able to see the information and the faster, the better it will be. One of the books that I've read recently is The Storyteller's Secret by Carmine Gallo. And he talks about word choice. And he's analyzed a number of speeches by famous public speakers like Elon Musk and Steve Jobs, and they're very inspirational. They really compel people to want to be like them. Everyone wanted to be like Steve Jobs, present the way he does. But they used very simple language. When you analyze the words that they used, their talks are given at a language that a 4th to 6th grader could understand. It doesn't make them less powerful. So again, focus on the simplicity of things and keep things as simple as possible. That doesn't mean things need to be boring. You don't want to totally bore people with repetitiveness and the same thing over and over and over again. You still need to have a variety of thoughts and sentence structure and information. This is a pretty boring slide to look at. There's nothing on it. There's nothing to engage you, to make you want to learn a little bit more. That's where visuals come in. Visuals are such an important part of storytelling. When we're looking at our monitoring data, we're looking at dashboards, we're looking at graphs. There's visual components to what it is that we're looking at and what we're seeing. Use those visuals, but again, keep them very simple. It's very easy to manipulate data. This is a very old chart that was published, I guess it's not that old, it's 2014. It seems many, many years longer. And it makes you look at this and think that, hey, there is a correlation between gun deaths and this law being passed. But unfortunately, the person that created this manipulated the chart. And normally on a y-axis, 0 is at the bottom, and the numbers go up. This is inverted. So if you look at it in another way, this is actually the correct way of looking at things. So there is a correlation. It's just not the original correlation. And in speaking to the creator of this, he had his reasons for creating the chart that way. He wasn't trying to mislead people, but that's what's ended up happening. The more creative you try to be, the more confusion you can potentially create. So try not to be super creative in the charts that are being created and are being presented. All stories have similar components and elements to them that we can replicate when we're sharing information. The first one is the rule of 3. We often see things presented in threes. You know, the 3 musketeers, lights, camera, action, stop, drop, and roll. You have the 3 stooges. There's so many things that are set in threes. And the reason that is 3 is a number that the brain can very easily understand and comprehend. It is the first digit that allows you to see a pattern. So you can't necessarily see a pattern with 2 numbers. Once you have a third element to it, that allows you to start to see a pattern. And this power of 3 is something that provides a lot of structure when you're presenting information. It helps you drive action from what you're trying to, helps you drive action in others. So 3 is the smallest number that we're able to use. It makes things easier for our brains. Our brains have so much information, as I mentioned, coming at us on a daily basis, and we want to make thinking easier. So don't present lots and lots of data points. If you're trying to look at a pattern, if you're trying to present information, try to focus on 3 main data points that you're trying to convey. And if you want, the most important information, present that earlier versus later. That's something that the brain will also appreciate. The data we collect tells us stories. We just need to be able to uncover those stories within the data. It's not about a single number or one metric that we want to focus on. What we're really looking at is what's the story that got us to that metric? What didn't we know, or what can we confirm from looking at that information? This is a metric. It's a number. I'm sure most of you are familiar with some sort of availability number along these lines. But this number doesn't tell us a story. Did this metric go up, or did it go down? Does this show improvement, or is this like an all hands on deck, something's really, really broken because it's not 5 nines and my system should be at 5 nines? What can I do to change this? What can I do to make this metric move up? What can I do to make the metric move down? The answers to these questions are what's the story behind the metric and what needs to be focused on, as opposed to just a simple number or a simple metric. The goal with data and with storytelling is to try to elicit an emotion, try to get a response from people, to stress the importance of a point. We have all this information that we are being overwhelmed with. Our systems are shouting data at us. We need a way to easily take that data and make sense of it. We need to help our brains get through some of the complex information that we're presented with, and tell better stories to make things easier for us, our coworkers, and our companies. Think about what stories our data is telling us. What new stories are we trying to create with this data? And when you're telling a story, remember 3 things. Use visuals to enhance your story, but please don't manipulate them. Keep them simple and easy to understand. So that's number 2. Don't overcomplicate things. The easier things are, the better. Your brain will thank you. Your coworkers will thank you. And the third one is remember the power of 3. Thank you very much.